and I, when we were about, my older sister was 6 or 5 and I was 2 or 3, along with my twin sister. We were all conceived at the same time because we are what are known as test tube babies, meaning we are conceived through in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization is a process that infertile couples can use while they're experiencing infertility or if they're just struggling in general to get pregnant. The Royal Science of Medicine and Health Encyclopedia describe in vitro fertilization as a procedure in which living eggs are taken from a woman's ovaries, put in a glass dish and fertilized, and then replaced back into the woman's uterus for pregnancy. Typically, embryos are taken and then they can be inserted with a needle that has a single sperm that immediately fertilizes the egg. This is what happened with my sisters and I. This process is delicate, time-consuming, and extremely expensive. There are different medications that a woman has to take that stimulates her ovaries to produce multiple eggs over the month, so that way doctors can just retrieve as many as possible and fertilize as many as possible, so there's a higher chance of her to become pregnant when they replace them back into her uterus. The medications can vary for everybody, so it really just depends on how your body is and what the condition is that you're experiencing for your infertility, and so the cost can vary for everybody. The first case of in vitro fertilization was in 1978 when Dr. Patrick Steptoe and Dr. Robert Edwards used 20 years of embryological studies and evidence tested on animals, and they used this to make the first test tube baby, and she survived and she was healthy. The Columbia Encyclopedia says that in vitro fertilization was originally devised for women whose fallopian tubes were damaged or when men had a low sperm count. From this first successful IVF treatment, there are different ways that you can become pregnant using AID, which is artificial insemination by a donor, or AIH, which is artificial insemination by your husband or your significant other. Women can also use surrogate mothers if for some reason their uterus is not fully developed for pregnancy and they cannot carry a baby full term, which obviously results in miscarriage or stillbirths. Doctors also now use in vitro fertilization to screen for genetic disorders or mutations in the embryos. If a parent carries one type of genetic disease, you can go through the DNA in the embryos to get one that does not have this mutation, meaning that the likelihood of your child developing this in the uterus or after they are born is very low or unlikely. And it makes it so that your child has a higher chance of survival, and that way you're not going to go through the pain of having your toddler die after their birth. But there's different risks financially and physically when you do in vitro fertilization. The Oxford Journal estimates that one live birth costs about $38,000, and that's just normal birth. So as soon as you add on the medications, the doctor's appointments, the treatment that you have to go through, the costs add up very easily, and a lot of parents decide to take on an immense amount of debt just so that they can start a family. There's also a risk of multiple births. That's what my twin sister and I were. We were the last two frozen embryos that my parents had, and they decided to implant both of us because we both made it through the de-thawing process. And when we were placed back into the uterus, we both took, meaning that my mom was pregnant with twins. This becomes a problem when doctors place too many embryos back into the uterus. You have cases like the Octomom back in 2008 who did in vitro fertilization, and she was pregnant with 8 babies at once. And this is bad because it's a lot of strain on the mother's body, but also on the babies because there's less space, obviously, for them to develop, and it also increases a premature birth. My sister and I were born 9 weeks early, but thankfully we were the healthiest babies in the NICU, but there are babies that are not so lucky, and it's stressful emotionally on the parents, and it's stressful on the babies because a lot of times when they're born premature, they do not have fully functioning organs. So there's a lot of different procedures that a lot of premature babies go through just to become healthy because they're not functioning properly, and then that cost also adds up with the previous cost of in vitro fertilization and just the infertility drugs that you have to take. And so having to watch your child go through all these different surgeries and knowing that this is going to be something that you're going to be stuck underneath for the rest of your life is very stressful for the parents because they really don't know if your kid's going to survive or not. When you do have a multiple birth, though, the doctor sometimes can suggest terminating a baby in the womb, meaning that the baby will just no longer be growing while the other twin or multiples will continue growing, and this just increases the likelihood of a baby to survive. A lot of parents choose not to do this because they don't think that it's possible for them to just terminate one of their children when they know that they're living and they have a heartbeat and Another reason that women do in vitro fertilization is if they're coming towards the end of their childbearing days, meaning that they're about to enter menopause. So the hormones that are used to stimulate the ovaries for egg production and thicken the lining of the uterus, there's less going through the body, and so they do not have those hormones thickening the uterus or creating healthy eggs, and so the ones that are produced are usually dysfunctional. And usually when this happens, the pregnancies end in miscarriage or stillbirth, and the rate increases the older you get when you have in vitro fertilization to have a miscarriage, because your body is not naturally producing these hormones, and so it's very hard to carry full term. But excuse me, sorry. But all the negatives that can happen with in vitro fertilization are outweighed by the positives. At the end of in vitro fertilization, you end up with a family and you have a child, and there's always the option to come back to the embryos that you have frozen away, to have a larger family, or you can bless other families by selling off the embryos, and it's just a way for other couples to start a family when they want to, even if